How has the final month and into the final couple weeks been going for you?
It's exciting, and we're really thrilled. We have gotten out. We were able to vote early today. We were one of the first ones at the polling place, and I think it's so important that Iowans get to have their voice heard, whether that's by absentee, early voting, or voting on November 4th. You know, it's a closing opportunity for us as the candidates as well, and we just have been so privileged to get to serve Iowa, both in our military capacity, but in our elected capacity to bring bipartisan solutions to our home state and really represent Iowa in a way that says, let's take what's best about Iowa and let's help share that with the rest of the country.
What has the campaign trail looked like for you in the final month?
So it's been aggressive. We were just in the cab of a combine helping farmers who are bringing things home for the harvest. We've been door knocking. We're going to be out tonight in a suburban area talking with voters firsthand. We've also been continuing our responsibility as a member of Congress. I was in Lucas County talking with hospital administrators. We work with volunteer firefighters to kind of hear their priorities. And importantly, we're also still passing over $26 million in aid back to our community that we've been able to help. Everything from bridges to rural reconstruction to what we're doing to lay a good groundwork of hard infrastructure dollars here in the state of Iowa. So I still have both hats that we're wearing as we go through this, and obviously my most important hat, trying to be a good dad to 6 kiddos. We've got everything from football Fridays to 4-H Saturdays, so it's a lot of fun.
How has that balance been this time around, you know, running for re-election while also being in Congress and just managing, like you said, all the hats at the same time while also kind of having that end goal in sight?
So, you know, we spent 20 plus years in the military, and I have approached the job much like I did when I was a military commander. Have a clear objective, identify a pathway to be successful, and usually what this means is assembling a good team. We've done that in a bipartisan way on the legislative piece, but then I also recognize that we've got a responsibility not only to our community, also to my family. And my wife has just been a real hero in this entire process. We have a senior in high school down to a preschooler at home, and she really has taken on the bulk of being a small business owner while also helping raise our entire family while I go and serve, you know, Monday through Thursdays. But I'm home every weekend, but I'm still sharing that time with the district, making sure that we're hearing, and then jumping in to be as best a dad as I can be. And I'm really proud to say our kids have been phenomenal about it. We get to bring them out, but more importantly, they give me a little bit of grace when I'm home and bring me up to speed so we can help mom together.
Why did you want to run for re-election?
Well, you know, we've done some really important things for Iowa, and I think as long as we are continuing to serve in a way that's meaningful, we should fight for it. We have worked for rural housing and been able to accomplish that in a divided government. We've worked for family leave, and we were able to accomplish that in a bipartisan way. We increased military pay for enlisted troops, the highest increase that's ever been done in history, because young men and women who don the uniform and are willing to serve our country deserve our full support. Equally, we are trying to take things forward that we think really have worked well here in Iowa that I've led. Things like tax cuts, which help Iowans keep more of their hard-earned dollars right in their pocket. They invest in their family, their farm, their communities. That's the way to grow an economy. I want to take that kind of common sense back to Washington, D.C. and find folks on both sides of the aisle who actually want to move forward with solutions versus some folks who would rather just complain and talk about challenges and not really come up with a plan on how to solve it.
You find yourself in another tight race, just like you did in 2022, but you came out on top in the first tight race. How are you using that experience or maybe momentum to set yourself apart in this next tight race?
Yeah, so Iowa's 3rd district is one of the most fairly drawn districts in the country, and I think that's really important because it's good for democracy. We've got a 3rd Democrat, a 3rd Independent, and a 3rd Republican. And it means when we go to Washington, we're really working for every type of Iowan out there to deliver results. You know, I was identified as the top 10 most bipartisan legislature in Congress because we have taken really Republican and Democrat ideas of the 80% of things we agree on and moved them across the finish line. I think that's important. You know, my opponent in this case is a Democratic operative. It's hard to change out of campaign mode to actually getting into governing mode. And I think it's really important that we work on what we can legislate to be effective to help people. And that's gone everything from what we've done to drive down medical costs, to help, you know, bring more resources back to Iowa in things like fighting homelessness here in the state, helping mental health, while also making really important investments in things like businesses, where we were able to bring a $6 million investment back to one of the poorest counties, Appanoose County in Iowa. And as a result, we got a multi-billion-dollar economic development plan that came with that. That's going to help grow that community for generations to come. And it's why I'm passionate about being able to go back and do more.
An issue that has kind of been at the forefront of your congressional race has been abortion. Yeah. I have to ask about the ad that was put out on you that is all over of you raising your hand in the 2022 debate on banning abortions with no exceptions.
Right.
When you saw that ad, I mean, what was your kind of reaction and how are you kind of addressing that?
Yeah, look, outside groups have spent $5 million running a portion of an ad to try and say a lie about us. And we've been very clear since the beginning. We are pro-life, but we've always supported exemptions for this, particularly health of the mother. We also support IVF and over-the-counter birth control. More than just saying it, we've actually led and done bills on this. And then we oppose a nationwide abortion ban. I think it's also fair to ask, why our opponent has avoided talking about his position on it. We've always tried to be transparent with this. And clearly, as we saw out of the most recent debates and the fact check, he believes in late-term abortion, something 70% of Iowans disagree with. He also wants it to be taxpayer funded. This is a dramatic change away from where Iowans are. And so we want to make sure that both sides and both candidates are being honest and truthful with Iowans. I think that's really important for anybody running for office.
So I know that was 2022. Why did you raise your hand then, and why has the stance changed a little bit now?
So the good news is the stance has never changed. It's how I voted. It's been consistent ever since I was in the state legislature. The commercial shows, again, 3 seconds of an overall debate, and I pushed back on the interviewer at the time and said, look, Iowans deserve to have a conversation about this, and that's what we've led on. We just had a conversation repeatedly on television where we got the opportunity to really share important, detailed solutions on how to address this. I want to make sure that women have access. I want to make sure that we are providing real legislative solutions to start a family, to help a family during a pregnancy, but also to afford those exemptions that I think are really important for a woman and her doctor when they need it. Now, what I also want to be clear on, though, is when the other side doesn't actually state their position, we've got to be able to hold them accountable, too. Multiple times my opponent, Lanon Baccam, ran away from the question. When he was asked a follow-up question, he refused to answer it. When he was put on air and asked the question, he actually said, yeah, I support, late-term abortions, and again, taxpayer funded. And that's out of step, not only with the country, but I think even with his own party.
Another topic that you've talked a lot about on the campaign trail and just issues is the economy and inflation and tax cuts. Talk about your experience in, the Iowa Senate and now in Congress on how you're using that experience to run on the issue of the economy and bringing tax cuts to Iowans.
I mean, I think every Iowan's feeling it, right? We have seen for an average family in Iowa, the cost of inflation taking $26,000 out of their pocket. That's money off the kitchen table, that's money out of the gas tank, and it's taking money straight out of their local community. These things are just bad. The reality is we were able to help Iowa grow when I was in the state legislature by cutting taxes. The 3 largest tax cuts in state history we were able to do under our watch, and we found that when Iowans have that cash, they invest it locally. And that's a great way to grow your economy. But it's also a basic economic principle that, don't spend more money than you have. It's also the reason that I've been very proud of the very first bill I led was a balanced budget amendment. To say that, if a family farm or a family budget has to be met at the end of every month, the federal government should do the same. Now, I will say, the reason we're in this challenge is because we have Biden inflation, which basically spent trillions of dollars that was totally unaccountable and didn't have any revenue coming in. And they've made it worse. Tragically, I'm facing an opponent who feels the opposite on tax cuts. They want to watch the child tax credit be eliminated. They want to tax businesses here in Iowa, but they forget that 90% of businesses in Iowa are really small businesses. They're hometown, Main Street family farms. These folks don't need more of a tax burden that takes their money out of Des Moines and sends it to DC. It harms communities and it makes an economic recovery that much more burdensome on individual families.
And tying that in a little bit to the farm bill, I talked with a farmer yesterday who talked to me about how the 2018 farm bill, isn't necessarily taking account for inflation.
Right.
And kind of just it's supposed to be rewritten every 5 years, and there's a lot of concern from farmers that they want a new bill passed, or they just want some type of guidance for the next year. I mean, how are you advocating for them in DC, and how would you continue to advocate for them if you were elected?
Look, inflation isn't just hurting farmers, it's hurting every family. It's hurting seniors. It's hurting new home buyers who want to get into that first home, who have seen the price just go crazy high under this administration. So specifically with the Farm Bill, I'm very proud that we have reached out to hundreds of farm communities to be able to get their priorities in this Farm Bill. As a freshman, we got more priorities in the Farm Bill than any other member of Congress, which is really Iowa outkicking our coverage. Additionally, we were able to pass a bipartisan Farm Bill in the House of Representatives in the Ag Committee. Everything from making sure we invest in hard infrastructure like broadband, crop insurance, new and beginning farmer tax credit to help bring that next generation of farm families to Iowa and keep them here. But then we also need the Senate to do their job. And this is a challenge. Right now, the Senate Democrats haven't even put an idea of what they want in the Farm Bill. And so we can negotiate in good faith, and I continue to press my colleagues, both Republican and Democrat, come to the table and have this for us. But we know this much. Farmers need that consistency. We know that there are families out there who need SNAP, which is why we've invested $1.5 trillion into a Farm Bill in the House that can be successful and meet both. But we need the Senate Democrats to also come to the table, or at least have a plan, so we can get this Farm Bill done, because it's not just farm families and states like Iowa, it's national security at risk here if we continue to allow this to be kicked down the road by folks in D.C. who just aren't doing their job.
I also want to ask about the topic of immigration. Being from Iowa, it's something, you may not think about just being in a landlocked state, but out in, D.C., kind of where do you stand on making changes and just kind of at the border crisis?
Look, we all know the challenge right now. We've got nearly 10 million people who enter the country illegally. We have 150 people from my age down to my high school daughter's age dying every day in America from fentanyl poisoning. And we have a flood of folks who have come here and are being human trafficked and exploited by cartels and the Chinese mafia. Now the challenge is we can stop this today. We have a Biden administration who could reinstate Remain in Mexico, who could finish the border security wall, and who could end catch and release that's resulted in just some truly tragic deaths here in the United States that didn't have to happen. I'm disappointed that my opponent hasn't come up with any plan. I'm disappointed he won't call on the administration to stop it today. But let me tell you what I've done. Within my first weeks in Congress, we passed H.R. 2, the most comprehensive border security bill. When that went over to the Senate, they didn't move it. We've talked to the Senate, and we've asked them to send us legislation, but they haven't brought a single vote up to actually take on this. We moved the SAVE Act, which makes sure that election integrity matters, and that places like California or D.C. that are allowing undocumented workers and illegals to vote in local elections doesn't happen in a place like Iowa, and certainly not at the federal level. And then we've pushed hard to make sure that we can support our Customs and Border guys. Look, I've been down there multiple times, both as a member of Congress and previously when I was in the Iowa National Guard helping to secure that. The tragedy that we see, the human factor of this, needs to be taken into account. It hurts the folks who want to come here legally most. And frankly, using this as a political football by certain, opponents right now doesn't actually help get to a solution. So I've offered 3 really good solutions. I hope this is something that we can solve in the opening days of the next Congress.
Something that's been talked a lot about in a lot of different campaigns is the bipartisan bill that was brought to the Senate but didn't make it out of the Senate. Would you have voted for that bipartisan bill to address the border crisis?
Yeah, so I'm very disappointed that Senate Democrats didn't even bring that bill to the floor for a vote. I'm equally disappointed that Senate Democrats didn't even bring up the House bill that's been sitting on their desk for 2 years. I'm incredibly disappointed that Senate Democrats refused to vote on our SAVE Act to make sure that our election integrity maintains. Look, there are absolutely things that we have supported. The ability to support Customs and Border Patrol, the ability to add new technology to the area. But all the great bills in the world don't matter if we have a presidency which is going to fail to enforce the law. And right now we have a Biden administration that refuses to put, catch and release in place, but also spends time suing states like Iowa who have caught, people who have been deported, come back to our state, commit a felony, and when law enforcement rounds them up, we're not even able to detain them because the Biden administration is now suing the state of Iowa. These things are wrong. They need to end, and we need to actually get border security under control in a comprehensive way.
So if that bill did make it to the House, would you vote yes?
Well, we're talking about a lot of things now, right? I mean, if it came through the Senate, if Senate Democrats supported it, there's a lot in that bill, including 5,000 people a day who would be given amnesty regardless of who they were. Those things are wrong. I helped get folks out of Afghanistan after the fall. We brought American citizens and Afghan allies back. Those folks had to be vetted. It was the right thing to do. I don't want to see a bill that would allow the first 5,000 people to knock on the door just to be allowed entrance into the country. Right now we've got 1.5 million people who have gone through the process to be adjudicated. They've gone through their due process and they've been found to be here illegally. And the administration still won't have them removed. That's driving up the cost of housing. It's driving up the cost of every medical visit. It's driving up the challenge for a teacher in a classroom that's overwhelmed with this. These are real challenges. So, I think there are a lot of good solutions out there, but we also need an administration who's going to enforce the law.
And you're in a race, just to kind of wrap it up, you're in a race that is every vote matters. It's really tight.
Yeah.
How do you plan to, those voters who are still undecided, how do you plan to appeal to them and make that final push in the last 2 weeks or so?
So I think this is one of the most important things. It's the reason that we're out in all 21 counties. We do this every quarter, and it's important to hear from Iowans their priorities, what we can do for them. And here's what we've delivered. We've helped working class families keep more of their money. We want to ensure that long-term tax credits so that a family with children can afford the expensive things of childcare, rent, and being able to keep food on the table. We want to make sure that we're working in a bipartisan way, as we've done for the last 2 years, to provide real solutions for Iowans for what they're asking for. And we're running on a record of accomplishment, from rural housing to helping our military forces and securing our southern border. These are success stories. Challengingly, I would offer, we've also talked with folks who hear from our opponent, he's only got one issue and no plan on how to solve it. That's disappointing. I don't think that's what Iowans want either, regardless of your political party.
Why do you think this seat should stay with you and your party?
Well, I will offer this. We have offered a lot of really good things as far as accomplishments have gone. We've delivered. Even in divided government, we worked across the aisle, we found allies, and we got things through the House, the Senate, and into the President's hand, who signed them into law. Now, that's a freshman. I think that these are opportunities for us to work in really smart ways. As a combat guy, I've always been able to work with a diversity of folks as long as we are focused on a mission. And as a result, we've got a good track record of not only what we've given to Iowans, but what we've allowed for a best practice in Iowa to be shared with the rest of the country.
Is there any final message that you wanted to send to people who maybe are still deciding, or just any final thoughts you wanted to leave Iowans with?
I think it's important that everyone have their voice heard. This democracy is too important for anybody not to take the time to vote. We've got great ways to do this. And what I'll say is that there's a clear option, and elections are important. This election is going to be the opportunity to decide, do we want to drive down inflation? Do we have a plan on how to do that through good reform and tax cuts? Do we want a secure southern border? Do we want a legal immigration pathway that actually works? Do we want to be able to hold accountable a DC that thinks they know better on how to take your money and spend it? Or do we want to give Iowans the opportunity to keep their money in their pocket, invest in their community, their family, their farm, and we can see real success happen right at the local level?
Thank you so much for joining us. Last time I talked to you was the primaries night when you won the primary seat. So tell me just what the past few months have been like for you.
Well, this is incredible. I've had an opportunity to travel all across Iowa's 3rd district. I've been to all 21 counties, many of them multiple times. The 3rd district has the most populated county in Polk and the least populated county in the state, Adams. I've even been to Adams 3 times already. And I'm listening and I'm learning a ton. I'm talking to Iowans in the communities where they are and hearing from them the issues that matter to them. And I think that's what's so key here. They know that I have a history of service from my time spent in the Iowa National Guard for 8 years. The 10 years I spent at the U.S. Department of Agriculture with former Governor Tom Vilsack. They know that I am prepared now to represent Iowa's 3rd district.
And why was now the time for you?
Oh, there can be so much done in our country, and that's what's exciting to me. The fact that when I travel the district and I hear from folks, there are a lot of issues that are top of mind. Abortion, women's reproductive freedom is one of the top issues we continue to hear about. It is so incredibly real for people now with this near total abortion ban that Zach Nunn laid the groundwork for when he was in the state legislature. Iowans are terrified for what that means for their health care in these rural communities. Women in particular no longer have the right to make decisions about their reproductive health. And this abortion ban we see in the state, make no mistake, this is Zach Nunn's abortion ban. This is exactly what he wanted, and he's got it. And abortion is now banned before most women even know they're pregnant. And that's one of the top issues we continue to hear about.
And you talk about how that's a top issue you continue to hear about, and it seems to be a top issue you've kind of centered your campaign around in terms of just seeing ads and being on the campaign trail. Why do you feel like that is an issue that you really wanted to hone in on the past few months?
Sure, and this is what's so clear to me. This conversation about abortion here, it fundamentally boils down to who gets to make the decision. And this decision is not Zach Nunn's to make. It is not his decision on if, when, and how a woman decides to start a family. That decision on starting a family should be with the woman, her family, and her doctors, period. That's it. And that's why people are just so fired up about this issue, because women no longer have the rights that they had for so long here in Iowa.
And you're in a really tight race right now. You know, why do you think it's such a close race here in this district?
Oh, I think Iowans and Iowa has always been close, and we can see that over the course of history. But the reality is, I think this race in particular is so close because people understand and appreciate the service I have brought to this country. Again, I spent 8 years in the Iowa Army National Guard, but I didn't join that until I was 17. And I don't know how smart you were at 17, but you know, I didn't know much about the world at 17, but I knew I wanted to protect my community, so much so that I enlisted in the Iowa Army National Guard. I had to convince my mom and dad to co-sign my papers in order for me to get in, because I wasn't even 18 yet. And for 8 years, I served our country. And in 2004, I deployed to Afghanistan. And that's what's really key here. Like in my time serving this country, from the military to USDA and beyond, I have dedicated myself to serving the communities, the state, and the country. And when you do that, when you raise your hand to take an oath of office, you don't take an oath for a party, you don't take an oath for a person, you take an oath to defend the Constitution and our democracy. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do here, is protect our communities and serve our communities again.
How do you think that experience, you know, just since you were 17 years old, how do you think that would translate over into Congress?
Oh, I'm a regular guy here. You know, I do the maintenance on my truck. I take my daughter to school every morning, depending on how she wants to get there. Sometimes I'm riding her tiny little bike with her on the front. But either way, you know, I do all the normal things that every other Iowan does, because I was born and raised in a small town, in a rural community. My wife and I choose to raise our daughter here. We live 2 blocks from where my wife grew up. My daughter goes to the same elementary school my wife did when she was a kid. And I just deeply, deeply love this country. I love this state for what this state has done for me. And I think that's what's key here. We have to get back to focusing on our communities. And the community that I grew up in Mount Pleasant, is so special to me because of how my family got here as tie-down refugees. And my mom and dad and my sisters came in 1980. I was born and raised in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And it was a first-generation Swedish immigrant family that sponsored my mom and dad and sisters. And they built a community with us. I felt that community so deeply that I wanted to give back. And that's why I enlisted in the Iowa Army National Guard at 17.
So I want to dive deeper into a few more topics. We touched on abortion. I want to talk about the economy, something that across the board, everybody in the country is really focused on, a topic they really care about. And you've talked about how you really want to uplift rural communities. Talk a little bit more about why you focus on those rural communities and how you plan to translate that message if you're elected to Congress.
Well, I can't help myself but focus on our rural communities. Again, born and raised in a small town like Mount Pleasant, I remember as a kid just being able to ride my bicycle around the whole entire town in 30 minutes and then having to figure out what to do for the rest of the day. And so to me, like, focusing in on and making sure that our small towns and communities have the ability to thrive is critically important. And at the USDA, when I was working there, I had the chance to be able to deliver on programs to reinvest back in our communities again. And I think that's what's key, because there's an opportunity for us to actually make things better. And in this, for what we have seen in my time, even working at USDA, we've made investments in water and wastewater upgrades in some of these small towns. We were deploying high-speed internet access to a lot of small towns. And there's so much that we can do to invest in our communities to make them better. That's the exciting opportunity here for me, for creating this ecosystem and an economy that works for everyone.
And then I want to turn over to now immigration. There's ads out there that say, you know, you would roll out the red carpet for immigrants. What is your response to that and where you stand on the border crisis?
Oh my gosh, this is so silly to me. I am an Iowan born and raised who served in the military. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2004. I was on a small provincial reconstruction team base for a year, 366 days. And there were about 40 of us full-time who actually did all the force protection there. We knew every single day who was coming on and off that base. And that was critically important for us for our safety. And there's no question that we need to have a secure border. I understand that in a deep, deep way. That is a national security and economic security issue. We should know who's coming in and out of our country. And for purely political purposes, when there was a bipartisan bill that could have actually addressed some of these issues, Zach Nunn and his party bosses killed it. They let it die. Why? Because it would have been a political issue for them. And the reality is that bill, a bipartisan bill, backed by the Border Patrol agents, would have put more agents at the border. It would have deployed technology to our ports to identify fentanyl and other drugs, and it would have forced the president to shut down the border when it became overwhelmed. That's the kind of action people want to see coming out of Congress, and unfortunately, that's a failure for the one we see now.
So is that a bill you would have voted yes for?
Absolutely. I think we absolutely have to find a way to secure the border here, and that's key. We need to know who's coming in and out of this country, and again, this is a national security and economic security issue. We have to secure the border.
I want to ask about a recent Iowa poll that came out that showed Kamala Harris, closing the gap on Trump here in Iowa. Mm-hmm. How is that excitement at the top of the ticket for the Democratic Party? Mm-hmm. How is that really helping you in your campaign?
Oh, it's huge. There's no question that the excitement with the Harris-Walz ticket has translated to our campaign. We are seeing people come out to volunteer, to organize, to get involved in so many different ways. Folks are going out and knocking doors. People are making phone calls. Folks are writing postcards. People are stuffing packets. We have people literally delivering yard signs all across this district. Folks just want to get involved because they understand there is a new path forward for our country and for our state in the 3rd District. And here, in particular, they know that my history of service is a new direction in which they want to go.
And you've talked about how you want to bring Iowans together despite political parties. Mm-hmm. You said political parties have become too polarized. You want to bring Iowans back together. How do you plan to do that in a state like Iowa that is notoriously a red state?
I think Iowa's a lot closer than it looks from the outside. And I think that's where Iowans are, truly, is right there in the middle, and that's where I am. And what's key to me is, again, like I said, I have dedicated my life to giving back, to serving this country, to serving this state. And when you do that, you're not serving a political party or person, you're serving the country. And for me in this race, it's so clear to me that no matter who it is that needs help, whatever question it is that needs to be answered, it doesn't matter what political background you come from, I'm here to help. I want to make sure I find a way to actually address the challenges that people face in our communities, and that's completely lost on politicians nowadays. Folks who are just more focused on, positioning themselves within their own parties in order to, get up the ranks versus actually paying attention to our communities and our people, and that's exactly where my focus will be as a congressman.
I want to ask about earlier this week, there was news that came out about the independent political party that came into your race to sway Republican voters. I mean, what do you make of that? And I believe the Patriots Run Project is what they were calling it. I mean, what do you make of that, and that it was in your district, and how do you react to that?
Well, I learned about it the same time everyone else did when I read about it in the news. Our campaign has nothing to do with this. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, I think what we need to get back to here in our country is the fact that what I had with my battle buddies when I was in the military. When I deployed to Afghanistan, when we were mobilizing down in Fort Cavazos, Texas, my battle buddies, they all knew I was Democrat. They teased me in the barracks because of it. I stood my ground, I defended our values, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter. Because when we were in the field, we didn't judge each other on our politics. We judged each other on our character, and that's what matters here. So when guys from opposite ends of the political spectrum, if we could come together to defend this country at a time of war, we can do that again in our country. We need to get back to focusing on our communities again, and that's what I'm going to do in this race.
You have a long list of notable endorsements across the state. How do you plan to use those endorsements just going forward in this final stretch?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who obviously support our campaign, and that's really key here. And for those folks who have publicly endorsed my campaign, they're out there hustling for me too. They're talking to their friends, they're talking to their families, they're getting out and getting in front of all the groups we possibly can organize to ensure that people understand and appreciate there is a new way forward here in Iowa, that there is an option for us to select a person who has a deep history of service from 8 years in the Iowa Army National Guard at deployment to Afghanistan in 2004 and 10 years working at the U.S. Department of Agriculture with former Governor Tom Vilsack. I have worked on my entire life giving back to this state and this country, and I'm ready to do it again.
And why do you think this district, why do you think it's time for a party change here?
I think Iowans know and appreciate that there is a better path forward because of what we see on the other side. With the fact that a near total abortion ban here in Iowa was passed and is now law. That abortion ban is exactly what Zach Nunn wanted. There's also another major issue here in this race, and that is public education. Iowans know that there's this consistent attack on public education. With the fact that there's a school voucher bill that's transferring public funds to private schools, and a continued attack on public education through dismantling of our AEAs, Iowans know that our foundation is in education. It's literally on our state quarter. And when that kind of stuff happens, messing with our public schools, making it harder for people to be able to go and utilize these public schools, Iowans are terrified for what that means for the rural communities in particular. Because these small towns, they might have one school, they might have one grocery store, they might have one post office, one doctor's office, a hospital if you're lucky, one pharmacy. You lose one of those pieces and your town starts to wobble a little bit. But if you lose the heart of your school, heart of your community, which is the school, where folks gather to do the cross-country banquets or to do the pep rally ahead of a Friday night football game, like that school is the heart of your community where people come to gather, to build community with each other as neighbors. You lose that school and your town's in trouble. And I think Iowans know that. And that's what they're terrified of. And they want their public schools back. They want public dollars for public schools. They want to return to what was the envy of the nation in the AEA system. That's the kind of stuff that they want to see again. And that's why I think this race is so important.
And I just want to ask, kind of to wrap it all up in the final month and a half we go, still, very much neck and neck race. It's probably going to be a tight race up until, election day comes. What's your plan going forward to maybe, kind of run away with the election?
That's it. Run, 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 run. I am literally going everywhere I possibly can. Anyone who invites me to go visit their community, I show up. And I love it because the best way to understand where Iowans are and the issues that matter to them is to show up, to listen, to learn. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And I'll be going out to as many counties as I can over the course of the next 46 days here, talking to Iowans, talking to voters, making sure they know that there's a new way forward here in this state.
What sets you apart from Zach Nunn?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, Zach Nunn laid the groundwork for this near total abortion ban in Iowa when he voted for the near identical bill when he was in the state legislature. The fact that he also voted for the school voucher bill laid the groundwork for that in this state. Zach Nunn continues to position himself within his own party to try to move up the political ranks. Like, we should find a representative who's actually going to pay attention to the people and our communities, and that's where I am in this race. I am a product of Iowa, the legacy of former Governor Bob Ray, who brought the Southeast Asian refugees to this state. I am a product of that. It is the fact that the community embraced my family and helped us establish ourselves and grow. I am a product of Iowa. And that's the kind of state that I think Iowans want to get back to, one that we are proud of to be from. And I will continue to fight for this state and our country.
Any final thoughts, messages, a final pitch to Iowans that you wanted to make before I let you go?
As I've said, I've dedicated my life to giving back. I love this country so deeply. That's the reason why I enlisted in the Iowa Army National Guard at 17 years old. That's why I served for 8 years, including my deployment to Afghanistan in 2004. That's why I also served again for 10 years at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I am dedicated to serving our community, and I think people know that I'm ready to serve Iowa as the next congressman from the 3rd District right now. Thank you.